Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being here. I got another amazing interview for you. I hope you're doing well out there. Please make sure to click subscribe and share and all those good things. It all helps the algorithm. Leave a comment in the comment thread. My guest today is she's so many things. She's an activist, a teacher, a doctor, she's been a candidate for the Green Party, and co-founder of popularresistance.org. And I'll just call her a radical inspiration. This is Margaret Flowers.
Thank you, Lee. That was very sweet.
No problem. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
How's everything going for you? You're in Baltimore, right?
In Baltimore, had a very mild winter, and looking forward to spring though, and gearing up. Lots of organizing going on right now, so that's a good thing.
Lots of organizing, absolutely. It's tough to know where to begin. I'll begin with the anti-war protest that you're a part of. Popular Resistance has a pretty high billing on a long list of co-sponsors. March 18th, I guess the chief organizer is Answer Coalition, but obviously a lot of people involved. Title is Peace in Ukraine, Stop NATO. And talk about that event and what you hope to inform people about there.
Right. Well, another hat that I wear is I'm on the administrative committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, and so we have been organizing, anti-war events. Local, mostly we've been focused on webinars and doing, local actions for folks so they don't have to travel. But when Answer put out this call, we all jumped on, Popular Resistance and others. Code Pink is part of it, the Black Alliance for Peace, to do this national rally because we felt like it was, well, one, it's the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. The United States is still occupying Iraq against the wishes of the Iraqi people. Of course, we use that so we can steal the oil from Syria and truck it through.
But the invasion of Iraq went fairly well. So.
Oh, right. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot we can unpack there. But when we're coming at, calling for an end to the war in Ukraine, we recognize the U.S. and NATO's role in this. And we also recognize that what we're fighting for is an end to all of, U.S. imperialism, capitalism, racism, colonization, all of these underlying parts of what's happening right now in the country and in the world. And recognizing that the fight against the war in Ukraine is also a fight against all wars and these other things, and fighting for the things that we need for, social infrastructure that supports people, for the respect for human rights, protecting the environment. All these things are deeply connected. And that's what, we'll be talking about in this national rally.
As a communicator, because I lightly struggle with this, but I always come down on the same side. I feel it's important to talk about, at minimum, evolving past capitalism. Ending is another way to say it. But I think there's a lot of people who kind of don't want to say the C word, and there's other issues that are similar, racism being one of them, where they say, oh, well, we just want to talk about anti-war. Don't get into anything beyond that because you might not have as big a coalition.
Well, one thing is, and you well know this, Lee, is that you don't need everybody on board to create the change that you need. I mean, every country that has had a major revolution, it wasn't everybody who was supported. There was always that faction, that fought against it, that oligarchic class, that extreme right-wing class that fought against it. You need to have the majority of people with you, which is, in the United States on many of these issues, we have that already. And then you need to have a certain percentage of the population that's mobilized. We see the struggle to end wars as part of the broader struggle for the changes that we need in this nation. And it's really important for us to know where we're going, and to be clear about that. If you think about the successful revolutions, the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua, they had a clear, this is what we're fighting for. And I think that's the perspective that we take. This is part of the broader struggle. And if we don't make these connections and be clear about what it is that we actually want to see, we're not going to get there.
Yeah, yeah. I think people tend to be far more energized when they're given the full explanation, as opposed to just a surface explanation in order to see how many people you can get to show up. I think then you end up with a lot of people who are not really that energized.
Well, and Kevin and I used to always say we'd rather have a smaller group of people that were really, clear and strongly with us than to have a big group of people that were, could be
Right.
easily swayed into one direction or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're referring to your late partner, Kevin Zeese, who, an amazing man and a mentor to me, as you have been. And so back about the war in Ukraine, and any thoughts on where it stands now? In a way, it's kind of like the U.S. has half gotten what they wanted, to cut off Russia from Europe, etc. Half failed to get what they wanted to, destroy Russia completely. But it seems like it's not going any further. So what they've gotten, and what they haven't, they're not going to get. So the U.S. seems to be starting to back off this proxy war to some degree, basically telling Zelensky, and this is in a lot of the mainstream press as well, you got to make great gains in the war right now, and then we're done. Which, says a lot about what the U.S. actually stood for.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is not a conflict that either the United States and NATO nor Russia can win. It's both sides see this as an existential type of fight. And, as the U.S. is willing to sacrifice the last Ukrainian for our desires to hang on to global power. But at the same way, Russia recognizes that this is about trying to destabilize Russia and maintain that power and isolate Russia. And so this is an important struggle for them, which is why, we're really calling for negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. U.S. needs to get out. We need to stop interfering and let them sort it out, as they have tried to do, or had tried to do, but with pressure from the U.S. and other Western imperialists have interfered with that. So it's an interesting situation. I think it's telling that last week at the Munich Security Conference, the United States was basically telling the world, we know that about 90% of the population is not siding with the United States and NATO in this conflict. And even within these, Western imperial nations, particularly like France, Italy, the people are saying, no NATO, get out. Germany, is certainly deeply impacted by what's happening there. And so I think that it may backfire against the U.S. if countries had to choose whether to side with the United States, knowing their experience with the United States, that the U.S. will lie and steal and cheat to get what it wants, and that actually there are other powers in the world that are growing that operate in a different way. I think the U.S. should be careful what it's asking for, because it may not get the answer that it wants. But this is a real test, I think, globally of, as people are starting to really criticize Germany as being such a client state of the United States and even going against the interests of its own people. How long is Germany going to tolerate that? The U.S. is across the ocean. They have Russia and China right there, as, now with the Belt and Road Initiative becoming, more connected. Which way are they going to go?
Yeah, I mean, Europe has sided with the U.S., or been forced to side with the U.S., despite it being incredibly harmful to their economies, their own people. But like you said, 80 to 90% of the world's population is either siding with Russia, or many of them are just staying out of it. And that's a big step. Like that, to me, that feels pretty significant in terms of the power of the U.S. empire.
I say it's very significant, because the United States its power is declining, and it's happening more quickly than even, I anticipated, and I think people anticipated. And the actions of the U.S. are driving a lot of it, and pushing us to be, it was kind of like the elephant in the room, but now it's been said, where countries are coming out and saying, oh, the US will say one thing and do another. They're not a reliable partner. The US will side with you when you're doing what they want, but as soon as you step away, they'll steal all your assets, like we've done with Venezuela and Afghanistan and Russia. And so countries are starting to recognize, like, oh wow, we need to get out of the dollar. We need to get out of, seeing the US as a leader. And the US is starting to not be invited to things that they used to be invited to. So I think it's going to be a big lesson for the US. Right. I think, at the Munich conference, I think somebody asked the Chinese foreign minister if he was going to meet with Blinken, and he kind of laughed, right? Like that's the response, like, that's a funny thing. Why would we meet? I think in the end they did meet, but that's the response.
Well, and speaking of the US, and our client states, not actually taking serious their promises to other countries. And I hope, obviously I wanted a peace accord between Russia and Ukraine from day one, but it is worrisome that there's now been admissions by Zelensky, Angela Merkel, others, that the Minsk agreements were just a stall tactic to further arm and fortify Ukraine, which says to Russia, we can sign something. We're not going to stick to it.
Yeah. And the US doesn't understand that, it's such blinders that the kind of political establishment has in the United States, that they think they can continue to get away with this. But yeah, I mean, what the US has proven over and over, particularly, we have a number of recent examples. Look at the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear agreement, that the US basically, they spent 15 years negotiating that agreement. Right. And then the US just, we're done with it.
And Trump got out of it, and everyone was like, he's insane. And now Biden's not getting back into it.
Right. Because he's making that same unreasonable demand. I mean, Iran complied with the agreement. They did what they said they were going to do. And so Iran is simply saying, and, I was in Iran in 2019 when there was some of this crisis going on, and there was a lot of political backlash against the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, because he had negotiated in good faith with the United States, and people kept saying, why are you negotiating with them? We can't trust them. And so then the US proved you can't trust it. And that, was a real activating force for kind of the right in Iran to be like, see, we told you so. You can't do this. So, so I think that more and more countries are having the courage to say the US is not a good faith partner. And,
which is a positive for the world if we're ever going to get to a place of cooperation and working together. It kind of has to happen. You mentioned China in there. Any thoughts on how important and significant this Chinese balloon is?
So interesting, tens of thousands of people die in, Turkey and Syria from the earthquake, and the US is talking about balloons. I think that's been, and actually China has been making fun of it. There's a great video, I don't know if you've seen it, of the US going after the Chinese balloon and the balloon evading the Air Force, and so it's, again, it has just pointed to the world, the ridiculousness of the US, how many dollars did we spend to send our fighter jets to go after these $12, hobby balloons that people put up into the air? Just, it's part of the whole declining empire, and what Alfred McCoy talks about, and how the declining empire just does these ridiculous things to try to hang on to power, and just, makes itself more and more expose its weaknesses.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to make a video about it, but it feels very similar to the hysteria that we've had in the past in the U.S., such as the Cuban acoustic cricket weapons,
right?
That were assaulting everyone, and back during the anthrax attacks, you had the media had people covering their entire houses in Saran wrap. It's just. We have a lot of hysteria in this country because our media feeds on hysteria and does this thing. And also it's useful for the propaganda to say China's evil and they're going to get you.
Well, and that's what the US is going to do. It's going to weaponize everything that it can. And it is doing that against Russia and China. And so, I think people have to ask themselves, if you're starting to like have animosity towards Russia and China, why? Why is that? What's caused you to do that? And the answer is you've been manipulated by the corporate media to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's perfectly fine to have criticisms of China, especially if you're in China. But China is legitimately doing things like trying to have a path toward a sustainable world, and like putting out, legitimate a path to peace in various ways, and they're being, ignored, or somehow it's villainous to actually be doing something about any of these things. It just seems like the opposite of what the U.S. is doing.
Yeah, and I often say this, there's so much the United States could learn from other countries around the world. China's one of them, but there are others. But we're not, because we're engaging in this hybrid warfare against everybody who's not under our thumb. It hurts us because we don't get the benefit of learning how did countries improve their education systems, how did they develop security for the population, how did they eliminate poverty, how did they house everybody, how do they provide health care. There's so much that we need to be doing here that we're failing on, and it's because of this American exceptionalism and this desire to be the superpower, which is just, it's not the fact anymore, and the US hasn't accepted that.
Yeah, I mean, China has done so many things for their own people. Like you mentioned, the 850 million, that's not a misstatement, that were brought out of extreme poverty. There, the transportation. Apparently, you can now take a bullet train from Shanghai to Beijing, and about the same time you can fly it. It's kind of crazy. But whereas the U.S. is kind of the exact opposite. We spend it all on military, and about $1 trillion a year, and we have collapsing bridges. We have people living on the streets. I mean, the homelessness is just out of control. It's like an opposite game plan.
We're living in a failed state. Yeah. And, and one of my oldest child doesn't live in the United States. And when he comes, he's doing a PhD abroad, because he had to go abroad to find a PhD in renewable energy, because the United States is not doing that. When he comes back, he feels it. He says it just feels so oppressive here, and people don't seem happy. And it's true. The U.S. is, we're creating the conditions that are going to lead to some sort of mass change in this country, because people are being squeezed, and more people are waking up to the reality that we don't have healthcare, we don't have housing, we can't afford education, our jobs are not secure, we're exploited at work, we're being poisoned. Look at what just happened in Ohio and East Palestine. It's just becoming so blatant and so obvious.
Speaking of being squeezed and the people being assaulted, let's talk about healthcare for a bit. You're uniquely able to speak to this because you're a doctor, and you also have been a healthcare advocate and activist for a long time now. Yeah, I guess give people your analysis of where American healthcare stands now. Is it better than 10 years ago? Or?
Sadly, no. It's getting worse. And the so-called Affordable Care Act, which we fought very hard against. It was an unpopular position to take, but I was serving in a volunteer position as a congressional fellow for Physicians for National Health Program through that process. And it was pretty clear from the beginning that whole thing was designed to bail out the insurance companies, because so many people were uninsured. We had about 50 million people without health insurance, and maybe an equivalent number of people who were underinsured, and the insurers were freaking out. And now we funnel hundreds of billions of dollars to them every year in these subsidies to them, and even selling their products. So it was pretty clear that was not going to work out. But what that has done is it has driven a privatization of our public insurances. So Medicare and Medicaid are overwhelmingly becoming privatized. For the major insurance companies, more than half of their revenue comes from the government, from Medicare, privatized Medicare, and these managed care organizations through Medicaid. And we're seeing this whole consolidation of our healthcare system in the hands of private, in private hands and venture capitalists. And it's what we call vertical integration, where they own everything. They own the insurance and the hospital and the physician practices and the laboratories and the pharmaceuticals. So they control that whole system, and it's about profit. It's not driven by health in any means or way. And so it's making it untenable for health professionals as well. And I think it's been happening for a long time. I remember touring the country in 2009 with the Mad as Hell doctors, and just being struck by, even in these conservative areas that we went into, we would do these events and we would invite local docs, and some of them would just break down and be like, things have changed over my lifetime as a physician. This is what I've experienced, and it tears them down. And so, and now we're getting ready. Biden's ending the public health emergency in May, which means that about 15 million people who've had their Medicaid protected, been unable to maintain their Medicaid, will lose it. And people will now have to start paying for COVID treatments and tests and vaccines, and and all these things are being pushed into the private sector again. So it's a bad situation here, unfortunately. And unfortunately, we don't have a really good leader in Congress who's been championing this in any meaningful way. And so the fight for the health reformers here in the US right now has been just trying to defend Medicare because it's being completely privatized and undermined through a program called ACO REACH that basically people are not even aware that they're getting put into this program. It's out of their control because it's the providers that are becoming part of this program, this privatized program. And then suddenly every Medicare patient that they have is suddenly in this privatized program without choosing that.
Wow. I've never even heard of this.
Yeah. And we can't, even really get a good effort behind that to stop that program. It was something that was started, it came out of the Affordable Care Act. They created the Center for Innovation in Medicare, which was just, in reality, it was a way to find out how we could privatize Medicare. Trump upped the ante with this program called REACH. And then there was pushback against Biden, and Biden's HHS just decided to rename it and continue it anyway. So,
nice.
Yeah. So it's one of the main areas, and I think that what the pandemic really exposed was what happens to a country when you don't have some sort of central organization, what happens when you don't have planning or a strong public health infrastructure, and the racial disparities in our country were really highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic, which is actually still happening, even though people are ignoring it. It's still an issue, and
I mean it the way our healthcare system destroys lives is unbelievable. And like, I was looking into healthcare for when I moved for me and my family, and there was one company that was available apparently in the entire area, and it was like the cheapest, because I'm not with a company or anything, I'm a self-employed. The cheapest version was $1,700 a month.
Wow.
And it's like that's a rent for an apartment. Like, it's
and even with that, Lee, you still probably have to pay out of pocket a certain amount before that even kicks in. And then the insurance company has the ability to deny your claim, even, or.
Well, it's funny that the death panel thing was the promotion against having healthcare in this country. And it's like, we have death panels right now. We have insurance companies decide whether you're going to live or die. And of course, try their best to make sure they don't approve anything. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And even, in Maryland, we tried to regulate the insurance companies, and there was an audit done as part of that. And they found that our major insurer, and what you find is they have a monopoly. They've kind of carved up the country. So in most places, people don't have a lot of choice of what insurance they can choose. When we audited our insurance companies here, we found that they were actually throwing out 20% of claims that they were supposed to pay based on their own policies. They're just putting them in the trash because they could get away with it. It wasn't until they were audited that this was found out, but that didn't change their behavior. they've been able to, they're able to anticipate everything that's coming down the pike and find a way to work around it. So you can't regulate health insurance companies in this country, which is why we have to get rid of them. They are an obstacle to our health. They are the death panels. They are sucking up our healthcare dollars and putting them into their pockets. They're some of the most profitable companies, you know, on Wall Street. And
we're the only country that does it this way.
Exactly. That's what I was just going to say. Of the wealthy nations, we are the one.
And, you know, people also think that if you have insurance, yes, unfortunately, you're paying out the ass for that insurance. But if you have insurance, then everything's fine. But that's not even the case. What was the study showed that 50% of everybody who gets a cancer diagnosis, if they get through it, will lose their life savings, even if they have insurance.
And people make that decision when they get cancer of whether to get therapy or whether to make sure that they leave a house behind to their family or their children are able to go to college. You know, they're looking at medical or just bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy in the United States. The biggest cause of personal bankruptcy is medical illness, either the costs or the becoming sick and not being able to work. And 80% of the people that went bankrupt due to illness had health insurance. So right. That just gives you a sense of it's a financial instrument to make money for Wall Street. It has nothing to do with health. And that's what I ran into. It was mind-boggling to me when I first came out of residency and out of that little protected world in the hospital where I didn't have to worry about payment, and suddenly out on my own. And the decisions of the insurance company had nothing to do with the health of our patients.
I have a friend who's a doctor, and she said that she prefers the midnight shift or the night shift because lots of times the insurance companies are closed, and so she can just help people without getting approval.
Yeah. Or people that I know that work in the VA system and love it because they're salaried doctors and they can provide the care that they need to provide. And yeah.
Crazy. All right. Well, let's move on to this just happened yesterday, an attack on Alliance for Global Justice, which is an important organization. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Alliance for Global Justice has been around for a long time doing Latin American solidarity work. But they also serve as a fiscal sponsor for about 140 organizations within the United States. And our organization, Popular Resistance, uses the Alliance for Global Justice as a fiscal sponsor. It allows these organizations to be able to have nonprofit status and have kind of the bookkeeping done by another entity so that we can focus on the work that we need to do. And AFGJ has now been accused of supporting terrorism because one of the organizations that they fiscally sponsor is the Samidoun Palestine Prisoner Solidarity Movement. And so this is ridiculous, but it's been a concerted attack on the organization by right-wing media, which has impacted the credit card company so that it has pulled out and so that AFGJ can no longer process any kinds of online donations. Which means for all of the organizations that fundraising now becomes very difficult to get somebody to take that step to write a check, put it in an envelope and mail it, to us. It's much easier for people to just go online. So, this is part of the whole attack on the left in the United States. And I think, people have got to recognize that we are a right-wing country. And, this whole illusion of democracy and prosperity is a myth. If you look at who the United States aligns with around the world, it's fascist countries and fascist governments. And that's what's rising here. And the attacks on the left are becoming more blatant and powerful. And so we need to be aware and fight back.
Yeah, this is one of the techniques used to destroy left-wing organizations, those that are making people aware of Israel as an apartheid state. I'm sure they sit around in board meetings and go, okay, well, how do we attack their money? How do we hit them with lawfare so that they're spending all their time in court? You've had some experience with that as well.
Mm-hmm. How do we demonize them? How do
yeah.
we suppress them? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of the techniques, and they cut ties because this organization is supporting a group that the Israeli government put on its terror list, and it's like, well, is the Israeli government a non-biased analysis of what is actually a terrorist? Like, no.
And let's recognize that, almost 1,000 Palestinian prisoners are being held without charges and without a fair trial, access to a trial, that hundreds of Palestinian prisoners are children, that they are mistreated, and particularly under this new government. And there's actually a number of Palestinian prisoners have announced an escalating campaign of resistance within the prison system because the new government is taking away what little rights they did have. And so actually, I think it's sometime in March, they're getting ready to launch a major indefinite hunger strike against the current. What's happening in Palestine right now is beyond what has been experienced previously. I mean, we think about how atrocious it has been for Palestinians, and I've traveled through Palestine as well. Under this new government, this is a very serious all hands on deck moment of when we need to be showing support for Palestinians.
Yeah, I just interviewed my last interview earlier this week was Adam Broomberg, an artist and professor in Germany,
and Isa Amro.
Their descriptions of what it's like to live daily in Palestine is just horrific. I mean, the destruction of the lives, the destruction of their ability to make a living, the olive tree groves. It's just every angle. They're under assault at every angle.
It's something that you can't even, grasp unless you really see it. I mean, I knew it was bad, but then you get there and you see what's actually happening. And it's just makes you have so much respect for the Palestinian people who are continuing to, just each day that they're alive is an act of resistance.
I asked them the same question. Do you feel like you've seen a shift in the way Israel is being talked about over the past 5 years? I feel like I have. I feel like the word apartheid is kind of on the tip of everyone's tongue, even if they're trying to defend the fact that it's, even if they're trying to say it's not an apartheid state, they're being forced to have the debate. And BDS growth, and it just feels like there's been a shift.
Definitely, it was gratifying to see the African Union kick the Israeli delegation out recently when they tried to sneak in. There have been major protests going on in Morocco against that state normalizing relations with Israel. So
the mayor of Madrid cut all ties.
Right, Barcelona, Ada Colau. Yeah, that's the first major city to cut all ties.
Was it Barcelona? Sorry.
It's Barcelona, Barcelona. That's a major step. I think that there's been a lot of resistance in the United States against efforts to make BDS illegal. To change the definition of anti-Semitism, so things are definitely changing. And yes, indigenous people around the world are also under assault. I see the comment from someone. So things are definitely shifting, but they need to. This is a very serious moment where I worry about. We've seen an increase in the murders of Palestinians. We've seen an empowerment of settlers to attack with impunity Palestinians.
Right.
This is serious.
Right. So much of the news I get about Palestine or about indigenous that we just mentioned, or about Venezuela or South America and Latin America. So much of it comes from popularresistance.org. This amazing news source that you and Kevin created and you continue to run. And if you could talk a little about running Popular Resistance and about kind of media literacy in our day of this time now, where even if not everyone believes the whole CNN, anything we don't say is fake news aspect, I think a lot of people are just so flooded with information that they need to be educated on what to accept as fact.
Yeah. Well, I tell people, whatever you read in the corporate media, you need to be questioning it. Popular Resistance, which we launched 10 years ago, June of 2013.
Oh no.
Uh-oh.
Wait, your audio is back, I think.
It looked like I've got good signal.
You're coming back. You're back.
Okay, sorry. It looks good on my end, but then I do live in the United States where internet
municipal broadband, another fight.
And that was another fight. We fought net neutrality and for municipal. Yep.
Well,
anyway,
I think sorry to go off on a tangent. Am I wrong in thinking that you and Kevin near single-handedly got people net neutrality for 2 extra years?
It was definitely not single-handedly. We were.
I know.
But it was a great coalition effort, and that was an amazing, instructive moment of how to win a campaign, because the organizations that we were working with didn't think that we could win, and I think they learned that we could.
Yeah.
If you do certain things. But anyway, PopRes, so yeah, I was just saying that it came out of the Occupy movement, but it was a period of like 9 months of meeting with folks and strategizing and trying to figure out what was needed to take the next steps. And information, having access to accurate information was important. Making people aware of ways that people were creating alternative systems. And then we've also organized, a number of campaigns like the net neutrality one, fighting against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, right, those kinds of things. So I'm glad you appreciate it. What we worked really hard to do at Popular Resistance is to look at what is being said right now about certain issues and try to provide people with factual information. We publish a lot of reports that people do. We access a lot of people who are experts in their field who don't get airtime in the corporate media to give their perspective and information about what's happening, so that people can see, they're saying this, but this side's saying this. What's actually going on?
What when you're searching for stories and finding news for it, what are you looking for? And do you have outlets I feel like I have outlets I highly respect on like 80% of things, but then I know what their 20% weakness is, so I know what to avoid. Oh, you froze again. Oh, Margaret has frozen. Damn it. Well, I hope she's back in a minute. Maybe she could try refreshing the page or something if she can hear me. That might help. I don't know. But anyway, I will for a minute to wait.
There we go.
There we go.
Yay. Yes. My internet was there, so I don't know what's going on. But there are definitely outlets and people that I, look towards. And, I think different outlets have their strengths. So I kind of look to each one and kind of look to what their strengths are and pick and choose, because different outlets have their weaknesses too. And so, trying to pick through the best of that. And on a particular issue, what I'll do is start going around and see what different places are writing, and then pick from that, what to publish on Popular Resistance.
Do you, I guess this is a softball question, but do you find it difficult to talk people out of mainstream media? I mean, I can't even get my parents to stop reading the New York Times.
It is a little frustrating. Yeah. I mean, my own family members I have that struggle with as well. It's so pervasive, and it's so easy for people to they're inundated. I mean, everywhere you go, right? There's TVs blaring with this stuff. So
Right. People nowadays leave propaganda on in the background like it's elevator music or something.
Mm-hmm,
I just
mm-hmm.
want to slowly, subconsciously be propagandized during the day.
One of my neighbors out the backyard, they have this giant screen TV, and it feels like almost any time of the day or night that I go out to the back deck to do something, I see in their window this giant screen going.
Yeah, I think people view it as their friends. I mean, I guess I can understand it from the sense that when I first started to wake up politically, I thought, back in like 2006, I thought that that like MSNBC was right. And so, fuck all those right wingers, but at least we have MSNBC. And so I wouldn't leave it on all day, but I could easily leave it on for an hour and think like, oh, these are the good guys chatting away. It's like, no, they're not. They're not the good guys.
Yeah, I remember in 2009 during the health reform process when Ed, he also had the show on RT. I'm blanking on his last name, but big guy.
Ed Schultz.
That's right. Thank you. So he had a show on MSNBC, and he initially during the health reform process would invite me on to talk about single payer. But it became pretty clear that he got the order from the top. You need to stop talking about that, because suddenly I, had been invited on frequently, and suddenly I was no longer being invited on at all. And then it wasn't long after that he ended up leaving and going to RT.
Right. So first it was stop having people like Margaret on. Then it became you need to stop endorsing Bernie. Mm-hmm. He was even apparently at Bernie's, this is the 2015 announcement he was running for president. So he goes up to Vermont on MSNBC's dime, has cameramen with him. He's literally, because Bernie announced like in his yard or something. And so he's there with all these people, press and everything. And he gets the call from the head of MSNBC, we're not going to air it. Like, we're not even airing the announcement that Bernie Sanders is running. So he was forced out for that. Ed Schultz was no revolutionary. He just was, even that was remotely left enough to not be on MSNBC.
Yeah. He was just, he was like a Midwestern guy. He just wanted to,
right,
salt of the earth kind of guy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk for a minute about Venezuela. And I guess we can start with the fact that the U.S. government just, again, stole the Venezuelan embassy a second time.
Yeah, that's been so interesting. So folks are aware that in 2019, the U.S. attempted a coup in Venezuela and failed, but pretended like they didn't and recognized this joker, Juan Guaido, who even I've met with opposition leaders in Venezuela say that he wouldn't exist without Washington, and they don't recognize him as, representing them. He was calling for military attacks on the country and sanctioning the country, something that's not a very popular thing.
Right. Calling for military. Imagine someone who says, I'm the president of America, of the United States, and I'm calling on Russia to strike the United States. Like,
yeah. So, I mean, down there, he's the butt of jokes. And whenever he does try to go to Venezuela and he's out in public, people, attack him. So he's not really even safe there. But the U.S. started handing over all the assets, Venezuelan assets they could, to Guaido, who misspent it. And then eventually the opposition this year said, we don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. You're not our interim president. You don't represent us. They're going to try to see what they can do within the electoral realm, I think, which is interesting that even I was down there as an election monitor in December of 2020. And that's when I met with the opposition, and they had full faith in their electoral system.
Even the opposition did.
Even the opposition. Yeah. They said this is, how.
Yeah. I always try and remind people that Venezuela's democracy is far more legit than ours is. They don't
it's far superior.
They don't vote on black box machines that you can literally never find out whether your vote counted.
They do a public audit the night of in front of anybody who wants to attend it. Yeah, it's very different. And anyway, so the latest kind of news on that was that the White House has now taken control of the Venezuelan properties, which they had turned over to the opposition, which we had tried to prevent. And I know you were there.
Well, I'm going to jump in because I know you're going to convey this too humbly. But you and Kevin and Adrian and Dave were the final four. There was many people involved, but you and Kevin also were the beginning of it. You called people in to give performances and teach-ins and stuff to hold the space. The Maduro government had said that you could be there and that you could hold the space for them since they could not be there. So invited you in, very different from the U.S. government, which was not invited in. And ultimately, what was the number of days that you guys
37.
37. And then the U.S. came up with some convoluted way to come in and arrest you. But
they just blatantly violated the law.
Yeah.
International law. The diplomatic properties are inviolable. The responsibility of the host country is to protect it. And instead, the U.S. brought in their regime change agents to try to terrorize us out and do damage to the building, break into it, all the things right in front of the law enforcement. And then when they saw that what we were doing actually was starting to gain more support and attention, they launched a military-style operation, which was unnecessary. They had zip ties on the front doors. They could have cut the zip ties and opened the doors. But instead, they used a battering ram and 100 officers in battle gear to take the four of us very scary people out as we sat in the conference room with our bags.
I didn't know about the 100 military.
Oh yeah, we looked out the window. It was remarkable. It was like wow, we get to play. We get to play.
They're so hyped up on that fact that I think it was like a year ago, Phil and some others went to project on the side of the building, and just that alerted them, and they sent like paramilitary troops because they thought you guys were going to retake the embassy, and so they way overreacted.
It wasn't the Maduro government that invited us in. We witnessed the U.S. and then actually a defecting Venezuelan attaché hand over Venezuelan properties to the opposition. And we said the only way that we can prevent that, sorry, my son.
That's okay.
Is if, well, he's in his bathing suit. I know, baby. The only way that we could prevent that was by being inside. And they agreed to let us do that. So.
Hey, buddy. Would you rather take a minute and come back and I can rant for a minute, or
that's fine. Yeah, maybe that would be better.
No worries. Go ahead.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, for those of you who don't remember, it was a pretty epic time. I mean, to see the U.S. government kind of flummoxed by a small handful of activists was pretty incredible. But at the same time, it showed the over militarization of the U.S. government. Like, they surrounded this building with all kinds of, railings and things. And then you had, members of Code Pink being arrested for throwing missiles because they threw a piece of bread to you or tried to.
Head of lettuce, yeah. A cucumber, the past president of Veterans for Peace, was assaulted by the police for trying to toss a cucumber up to us because they had cut off our ability to get supplies in.
Yeah. It was just unbelievable. And then, of course, the Kafkaesque court proceedings where everyone was instructed not to explain to the jury that Guaido was not the president of Venezuela.
We called it the Kangaku court.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so where do things stand now with Venezuela? I mean, in terms of what you know, how is Venezuela doing?
They are actually starting to recover somewhat. Economically, the U.S. continues to wage an economic blockade against them. I think the elections in Colombia have been very important to the Venezuelans because the previous administrations had really been so close to the U.S. and had allowed, paramilitary cells to be organizing along the border in Colombia that came across and did sabotage within Venezuela. Right. But I think under the Petro Marquez government, that's not going to be tolerated anymore. There were negotiations going on within Mexico, but the President Maduro recently announced that they were not going to continue those because the United States was not respecting any agreements that they had made in past meetings. They were still, not taking action. The U.S. continues to have billions of dollars of Venezuela's assets. And part of the agreement was that those would be returned. And now the opposition is saying they don't know where that money is. But the U.S. stole Citgo and now is selling that off. The U.S. is part of the UK not allowing Venezuela to have access to its gold that's being held in the London Bank.
Right. I don't know if a lot of people know this, that Citgo was a Venezuelan entity. So every Citgo gas station you see was connected to Venezuela, and the U.S. basically stole it.
Yeah. And then a judge in Delaware agreed that the U.S. had the right to auction it off, because this is another kind of weird thing, that there was a Canadian mining company in Venezuela that the Venezuelan government kicked out. And they want Helen Keller. So hold on one second, baby. So they, so the Canadian company sued Venezuelan within a U.S. court, and the U.S. court awarded that company, an award from that, and then they're selling off Citgo so they can pay that company. Like, how does this work that the U.S. gets to decide?
Right. And gets to steal billions that are in a British bank.
And then we have to mention Alex Saab, because people are not aware of him, that he is a Venezuelan diplomat who in June of 2020, after the pandemic began, was flying to Iran to negotiate the purchase of medicines and food, which, because of the economic blockade, even if they have the money, they can't purchase what they need. The financial institutions won't process them. The countries won't do business with them. And so he was intercepted by the U.S. and detained and tortured and then kidnapped from Cabo Verde, where he was detained, and brought to Miami, where they're refusing to recognize his diplomatic status. So he's being held again in violation of international law.
We have him in a Florida prison, and this is a Venezuelan diplomat. I mean, we have journalists, publishers being tortured in jail, Julian Assange. We have diplomats being tortured in jail, Alex Saab. The U.S. is not for any of the things that we claim to be for.
And I hope more people are waking up to that fact. And the other part of popular resistance is educating people about how things can change, and we have a school that talks about movement strategy, but also providing articles about things that people are doing in their communities. And so, if you go to the create section of the website, you'll find alternative ways that people are organizing their communities. And that's part of the struggle. It's opposing the things that need to be opposed, fighting against those, but also creating the alternatives that we want to grow up.
That's another great thing that popular resistance has that is very difficult to find other places, is small meaning localized success stories of workers going on strike, of people developing a community garden, of people fighting against police brutality in a way that's not a national news story. And so it's very tough to know where to get that stuff. I mean, even independent media rarely covers it.
Right. Yeah. And it's just, what's important for people to understand is that we're trying to build a movement to transform the way things are done so that people's needs are met. People can live with dignity. The planet is protected. We have a livable future. There are so many different ways that people can be involved in that. And so maybe for you, it is organizing to go to protests, but maybe it's more of writing letters to the editor or educating people in your community, or maybe it's more of working on a community garden or trying to build an alternative currency or pushing for a public bank. There's people need to find what your passion is, where your strengths are, and figure out how you can plug in, because it's all creating this wave of transformation. And we have so much to learn from people in other countries, and particularly our Latin American brothers and sisters. And it's why I hate calling the United States America, because we forget that Americas, the Venezuelans are Americans, the Nicaraguans are Americans. And we have so much to learn from them, because they have fought against U.S. imperialism. And, when I was in Nicaragua and meeting with the members of the rural, workers movement, the ATC, as well as the Sandinistas, they talked about something, revolutionary discipline. It's something that we need more of here in the United States, is having that political clarity. People get fooled so easily in the US. Once you understand the tactics, and that's why the school is important. Once you understand how the opposition works, how the power structure works, what tactics they use, you can recognize it when you see it happening. And that can lead you to question. When I saw the protests in Iran around the hijab, around the death of the woman there, I immediately started questioning, okay, what's actually going on here? I need to go to my sources in Iran and talk to them. And, because we know the USAID and how it operates, and we also know how the US operates cells along the border of Iran, and they can send provocateurs in, which is what we immediately saw those protests move towards anti-government violent protests. And those are provocateurs that have come in to do that. So once you start to recognize it, then you can see it, or at least question what you're seeing.
Yeah. All great points. And you answered one of my final questions without me even asking it, which is what, you've been involved in so many aspects of creating change, frontline activism, media, electoral efforts, online activism, organizing, teaching. And so I was going to ask you what you feel is most effective, but I think your answer is that they all play their role.
Yes, everybody can play a role, and we need to see ourselves that way. And that's something that Kevin, through his life of work, really focused on, helping to connect movements to see themselves as all part of a broader movement, and finding ways to communicate with each other and to act in solidarity. I think what's happening within the labor sector right now in the United States is really important. Both the independent unions that are forming, but also the work within the established unions to build rank and file power against, what for many of the unions have aligned with the bosses and not with the workers. And workers have a particular power because we can shut the country down. We can shut the ports down. We can shut the railroads down. And they're afraid of that. And that we're seeing in the United Kingdom, massive strikes going on, national strikes, major sectors coming together, education, healthcare, transportation, coming together to demand an end to the austerity, an end to the support for these wars. And that's what we need to be seeing here in the United States. But I think, it's building, and everybody talk about it, read about it, spread the word, because we do have the power. We can change things. And it's amazing how a small group of people, and I've seen this happen, can have a tremendous impact, on what's going on.
They can end a Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Right.
Margaret, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything you do. Everyone should definitely check out and subscribe at popularresistance.org. Also, the protest march is March 18th. And what else should I tell folks?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Buses are being organized up and down the East Coast to come into Washington, D.C. on the 18th. If you're not in the proximity of Washington, D.C., you can organize a local action that weekend. It's going to be a whole weekend of activities. And, just continuing to build. There is an anti-war movement in the United States. There's been a lot of confusion and works to undermine that movement in the US, but we really need to overcome those obstacles. And I think this March 18th action is major organizations coming together to work together to stop the war. And this is, we'll continue to do that and to build that. So I hope folks will turn out on March 18th.
Thanks again, Margaret. I will see you soon, I hope.
Yep. Thank you, Lee.
All right, everybody. There's Margaret Flowers. I hope you enjoyed that. An amazing human being doing amazing work. And so definitely, set popularresistance.org is one of your main news tabs that you can check every day. Folks, our stuff is, and I see the links are in the chat there if you want to grab them from there as well. Our stuff is completely independent. This is a Mint Press project, but we are independently funded by you guys. So please join up at patreon.com/behindtheheadlines. You will instantly get some perks, such as my blooper reel of me fucking up many times while taping Most Censored News. And I think there might be some merch and stuff. So yeah, check out patreon.com/behindtheheadlines. Also, I do 2 of these interviews and a new Most Censored News every week. I'd love for you to check out. I'm going to go grab the link real quick. I'd love for you to check out the latest Most Censored News because it is it's about how we can get rid of 99% of police and still have a excellent and functioning society. In fact, a better functioning society. So that YouTube link is right there if you want to check out the latest episode of Most Censored News. But I have 2 of these interviews a week. Next week, I will only have 1 because I am moving and I'm a little too busy for the 2 interviews. But I will be doing 1 next week with, we mentioned him in this interview, Gary Condon, the co-founder of Veterans for Peace. I'll be talking to him next week. I also will have another episode of Most Censored News. So click subscribe, click the notify option, and I will see you then. Keep fighting.